Welcome to our very first episode of Coffee with Crisp. My name is Spencer. Very excited to talk to you, Jordan White, today. Jordan White, in addition to being a product manager here at Crisp, he has experience working at Walmart and General Mills as a replenishment manager and various supply chain roles. Jordan, will you just take a moment and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, I started my career at Walmart where I was a replenishment manager, and that role was in Walmart merchandising. And merchandising is the part of Walmart that owns the shelves and what is sold, et cetera. And so, in merchandising, there are a lot of roles, but the two main roles are the buyer and the replenishment manager. And the buyer is like the CEO. They decide what goes on the shelf. And the replenishment manager is like the COO. They make sure stuff actually gets to the shelf and collaborates with suppliers to do that and make sure stuff is available for customers all the time, year round. After that, I went to General Mills, like you mentioned, before coming here to Crisp.
Excellent. Well, we are so lucky to have you. You bring all sorts of great industry knowledge to Crisp and help us build a better product for sure. Um, I'd like to tell you a little bit about why we're here today. Um, our goal is to help suppliers be successful with retailers, right? And so Jordan has experience kind of on both sides of that, and I think he can provide us some really interesting insights that hopefully will help you be successful with your own business. And I think that the start of this is just tell us a little bit about what the day in the life is like for a category manager.
Yeah. Yeah. At a large retailer, uh, in merchandising or category management, first thing you do when you come in the morning or you come in on a Monday morning is you check all your numbers, check all your metrics. It's very data driven, and you'll do that. If as a replenishment manager, I would come in and check my in stocks, check my fill rates for my suppliers, and keep on top of that. If you're a buyer, you look at another suite of metrics related to profit and inventory and turns and different promotional events you might be running as well. Yeah.
So it sounds like it's all about the numbers, right? Getting in,
Yeah.
familiarize yourself with where you're at, and just being very very data focused.
Yeah. If you work at a Kroger, a Target, Walmart, a large retailer, you have so much data. And so it's at your fingertips. You have so much of it, and you run the business that way, you really do. So, yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, it sounds like potentially a fairly high pressure role.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that can happen, things that can go wrong, but ultimately you are the owner of the category and you're responsible when stuff goes good or bad. So you spend a lot of time in meetings, you spend a lot of time collaborating with cross-functional partners to plan ahead so that things go well and go according to plan. And you also will create strategies to guide the category and things like that. So yeah, it's merchandising is, at least at Walmart, it was a major part of the company.
Yeah. So, and I can see that getting those right partners with suppliers would be so critical to success in that role. Maybe tell us a little bit about how a new supplier can get their foot in the door and break into to a retailer like Walmart.
Yeah, interestingly enough, it's probably a lot like raising funding or raising capital for your business. And what I mean by that is, number one, you have to show that you have evidence that you will be successful. So you bring data as your evidence, and things like units per store per week at other retailers, or maybe not specific to another retailer, but overall, how is your product doing elsewhere in the country? And being a master of that data convinces the retailer that you know what you're doing and also that your product is doing well. So that's another thing. Showing traction is, like, it's a big deal if you're trying to get investors for your company. It's a big deal for trying to work with a retailer. They don't necessarily want to take chances if they don't have to. And showing strategy as well that's big because they want you, if they're going to take a chance on putting you on the shelf, they want to know that you have a plan to be
Mhm.
successful and gain market share.
I sometimes imagine, breaking into this market is sitting before one of these buyers and then trying out the pie or the food that you have made them, right? It sounds like what you're telling me is it's more about coming up with evidence and data points to support the case that you're going to be successful with that retailer.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true, especially nowadays. You can have a meat buyer who is a vegetarian or a milk buyer who is lactose intolerant. And if you can imagine, those people are not making decisions based off of texture or flavor, they're making decisions based off of the data. And that's kind of how things operate.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think that is so interesting. Once you've broken in, right, you're getting your product on the shelves. Tell me, what does a supplier absolutely need to know with the retailer?
Yeah, I think there's a really good book on building trusting business relationships. And I think it's applicable here. It's called Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. And he breaks trust into two things: having character and being competent. And so the first thing I would actually say is have character. That's the first thing you need to build a great relationship with your retailer. And how I would define that is do what you say you're going to do. So if that is filling orders, fill your orders. If it means you told your retailer you would get that Excel spreadsheet over by the end of the day, make sure you do it. Respond promptly to emails. These are all things that have to do with having character and being reliable and being consistent, because retailers' biggest pain in one form or another, I think, is uncertainty. And that can come in a lot of different forms: market trends, you have other retail competitors, you have new entrants into the market, you have commodities, you have weather, social events, pandemics. All of these things create so much uncertainty when running a retail business that the last thing you need is a supplier who's very unsteady and who doesn't keep their commitments and who's unpredictable.
Yeah,
So
it sounds like you really need those suppliers to be a partner and help you reduce the randomness out of the system, so you can run the business in a predictable manner.
yeah, and it pays off. Doors typically open when you're a reliable and consistent supplier.
Can you give us an example of maybe a time when, that lack of predictability was a real problem with a supplier?
Yeah, you know, suppliers can't always ship stuff. And so one example is I had a supplier, and this probably happened with multiple different suppliers. I had a supplier that said, we're not going to be able to ship in full for a few months. And obviously, you don't like to hear that. But, we were like, okay. A few months go by, and they're still not shipping in full. And you start to ask questions, and the supplier says, hey, you're the priority. Well, then I go on vacation and I'm in the middle of nowhere in Montana, and I walk into a convenience store, and what do you know? There's my product that I need in my Walmart stores, right there on the shelf of this probably one location convenience store. And that just derailed the trust with that supplier, because in my mind, priority means that my stores get product before another retailer that is probably
Yeah.
0.0001% of their business. So
Well, and imagine as a big retailer like Walmart, you expect that special treatment in a way because you are able to give them access to so many people, right? And add so much sales to their business.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So let's say you have character, you're developed that trust with your buyer. What's the next thing to pay attention to?
And then I think it comes down to competence. So knowing what you're supposed to know, really, and being able to do what you're supposed to do. That can be as simple as, do you know the jargon? So when your buyer is talking about a gondola, you know that they're talking about the shelving that goes down the aisle and not a boat in Italy, right? It's a ridiculous example, but there's a unique jargon to retail and to food retail, and then each retailer has their own jargon. And if you want to show competence, you should speak their language, and you should
And I guess if you go in there, you don't know the words that the industry is using, it's going to be tough to convince them that you're really an expert.
exactly, and it's going to be tough to convince them that they should trust you with their shelf space. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes total sense. Uh, what other aspects can a supplier do to build that, to show that competence?
I would say knowing what is expected of you. So some suppliers have a yearly visit with their merchandising team. Some of them have quarterly or monthly visits. But when you walk into those, you better know what they are expecting of you. For example, if I'm in a meeting with a supplier and they don't know what their in stock is or what their in stock goal is, that doesn't look good. And so it just shows almost like a lack of care or a lack of understanding, and it doesn't show competence, certainly. And then other ways are knowing your industry really well, knowing your customer really well, knowing your product category and group really well. And you can bring insights that create an appearance and just show competence by bringing those industry and category insights. And the retailer doesn't always know everything about the category, certainly. And then the final thing I would say to show competence is knowing your own business. That one by far is probably the biggest. Knowing your own data, knowing your own numbers, and being ready at all times to talk to those.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. Talking to a connection of mine recently, and they talked about having that initial discussion with a large retailer. They had all their paperwork ready. They had the numbers there in hand, and the retailer began firing off these questions. And as they were trying to look them up in their paperwork, the category manager said, "I thought you knew your business, right? They should be top of your mind." And kind of really reinforces that idea of you have to know that business and you have to be able to show that competence, uh, you know, at a very high level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Okay. So for a retailer, right, we've talked about how you can best behave with them, but what's a retailer's top priority? What is it that keeps them up at night?
Yeah. Keeping the shelves full, probably. Uh, yeah, it's expensive real estate. A little slot on a shelf right there. And I think if you consider maybe a billboard in Times Square or a Super Bowl ad, having an empty shelf is equivalent to having one of those things, the billboard or the Super Bowl ad, and having it be blank. You can imagine watching the Super Bowl and here comes a commercial and it's a blank black screen. And what a
Yeah.
waste of money, right? and that's how empty shelves are in mass retail, because these retailers, Kroger's, Target, Walmart, etc., they have massive amounts of weekly shoppers. Walmart alone has over 200 million plus weekly shoppers.
Wow.
And so you can imagine that real estate on the shelf is worth a lot of money. And with an empty shelf, you might as well be burning money. So,
Yeah, when we talked about this a few weeks ago, I now find myself going to grocery stores and looking for these blank spaces,
yeah,
right? And thinking about that lost revenue for that supplier who's trying to be successful, trying to build credibility, right? And is just shooting themselves in the foot. Uh, we didn't traditionally see that much blank space until recently with the COVID-19. Maybe tell us a little bit about how that's impacted that relationship.
yeah, I think the tricky thing with COVID is that, like you said, there's a lot of unpredictability. There are a lot of question marks and a lot of unknowns, right? And so whenever you find yourself in that situation, data becomes more important. In a pre-COVID world, you could kind of approximate, have a lot of safety stock inventory, But now, under the circumstances we're in, I don't know that you can be so careless with data anymore.
Yeah, it seemed like there was this giant lag as the data worked its way through that supply chain and we're able to bounce back. And one of the things that's really important to us at Crisp is to improve that data transparency and help suppliers understand the data and understand what's going on at those retailers so they can make those decisions quicker and build more credibility, but also just keep their product moving.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that plays into this idea of a little bit of velocity, right? You have your product on the shelf. Tell us some of the basics of velocity and how are retailers thinking about that?
Yeah, that's a good thing to bring up because though it is a amazing accomplishment, uh, sadly, to get your product to the shelf. I mean, it shows a lot of supply chain capability and it takes a lot of work to get your product to the shelf. But unfortunately, that's still not enough. And retailers see it as their job to provide a location to hold product for customers to buy it. But they typically do not see themselves as the person responsible to let the customer know there's a new product on the shelf or market the products on the shelf. That's not their job. And they see that responsibility falling on the supplier. And so it comes to increasing what you're talking about, velocity. So at the rate at which your product leaves the shelf. And
Well, I'm going to that point is so powerful, and I think it's such a surprise to me that actually moving the product off the shelf becomes much more of that supplier responsibility rather than the retailer who just has it on the shelf, right? It suggests that supplier needs to be a partner in driving that velocity.
yeah, if I can give an example, say I own a clean label salad dressing company. Well, if you walked to your grocery store down the street and you looked at the salad dressing section of the store, it is a complete ocean of like flavors and sizes and different types of ingredients. It has a lot of variety. And so if I put a new product on that shelf, it's going to get swallowed up. And
Mm.
so it necessitates the supplier. It would require me as the owner of that company to really invest in letting customers know it's there and marketing. But let's say I had 3 units per store per week to start off. If I do well and I increase that to 8 units per store per week, I'm likely to get more stores. So it's a virtuous cycle. Then at that point, you get another chance to increase your velocity and then get more stores, and you can grow your business that way and have a lot of success.
And I assume that introduces some risks too, right? You do really great
Yeah,
at a location, you get that great velocity, you expand maybe to areas that are not as strategic for you, and that velocity drops, and you start seeing yourself pull back. Like, how do you manage something like that?
data. Yeah. You need to have data to know where good locations for your product are and good customer types. You need to be able to speak to that with your retailer and be an advocate for quality distribution or quality store choice, because otherwise, like you said, you get horrible distribution, your units per store per week drops, and then they want to take you off the shelf. So
Yeah.
it,
So it means you
develop,
have to be much more proactive and working with that retailer to share the data that you have about where they can be successful so that that velocity or that new space you pick up is space that you want. You have the right distribution.
exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that is so interesting. Well, thank you for sharing some of those thoughts on velocity. I'm curious about data sharing. What's the expectations from a retailer for the data that's being shared from the supplier?
Yeah. A lot of suppliers are confused about sharing data with the retailer because in their mind, they got that data from the retailer. They took it out of the retailer portal. So why would they share it with the retailer? They already have it. Well, what they don't know is that though retailers have a lot of data, what they don't have is a lot of time. And so, what I didn't tell you about a day in the life of a replenishment manager or a buyer is that they spend a lot of time unburying from emails, a lot of those supplier emails. And so it, this whole thing with data, they don't have time to go into your information and your data and find insights, nor do they see that as their responsibility. The retailer gives that data to the supplier so that you can find insights and then bring them back to the retailer. And that's a great way to build trust. It's a great way to show competence. And it also helps you grow your business. If you find insights that will grow your business, bring them to the buyer or the replenishment manager, then you can grow with that data. Another level above that is if you can find information and insights that will help the entire category grow. And the buyer can also, and the replenishment manager can really appreciate that kind of information as well.
Excellent. You know, it seems like there's a couple themes that are emerging as we've talked. One of them is that these retailers, they're really looking for partners, right? They're looking for suppliers who can help them be successful and help them make their own business successful. And so the more things that a supplier can do to facilitate that seem in the right direction. Additionally, data seems absolutely core through this whole process, and making sure that you have access to that data, you can analyze it, and you can use that to help drive the right decisions. Thank you so much, Jordan. It was wonderful to have you on today, and I really appreciate the insights that you were able to share. Here at CRISP, we're doing everything we can to improve the sharing of data, right? We believe that the data that's sometimes siloed with a retailer could unlock incredible value for suppliers in this chain. It helps you not only make better business decisions, but helps you better communicate with your partners on the retail side. So feel free to come visit gocrisp.com. We have a lot of great content. You can find other webinars and other white papers that we've put there. But we've really enjoyed doing this session, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.